the best gift we could possibly be given is to see ourselves as others see us. I think it's Robbie Burns, and I just mangled the hell out of it, but that's basically what it meant. And yeah, you do get that opportunity, you know. And it's weird, and this is something the positive illusion people never think about either, is that sometimes people think they're better than they are, like objectively, whatever that means, but lots of times the opposite is true. And I think often it's true even more often. It's like people think they're a lot worse than they are. No one's as anxious as me, or as concerned about X, or, you know, as confused about this, or, you know, as socially awkward, or as not funny, or, you know, everybody's got their paranoia about this part of them that's the worst that anyone could possibly be in the entire world, and it's almost never true. You know, other people are a lot more like that than you think, and they're running around trying to hide it madly as well. So that's a good thing. Well, you know, you also allow in some sense, you're allowing yourself out into the light. And you know, you could say in some sense that all of those hypotheses, as you move up and down the hierarchy, you know, you move from trivial trouble to really not good trouble as you bounce. And all of that is an attempt to specify, in some sense, what that room contained. And it's not easy. You know, and it's weird, too, because the room can contain things that alter your past. You know, because maybe you say, well, maybe you're going for a computer science job, maybe you're not, whatever. You know, you go in there and you think you're the top person in your class, and maybe you were, but, you know, the people in there are so far ahead of you that you can't even imagine ever catching up. And, you know, when you come out of there, the manner in which you construe your educational history is going to be radically transformed. So there's a lot of trouble in that room. There's a lot. Well, you roughly have one set of neuropsychophysiological functions for familiar territory and another set for unfamiliar territory. Now, what I would say, this is where this becomes, I think, radically different. The terror management theory. What this hierarchy is doing when it's functioning is shutting off, it's keeping the system that operates in unexplored territory shut off. And you like that. And that's when you're calm. And like you are in here, you know, you're relatively at home here because you assume that you know how to act here. As long as you sit and you ask questions more or less appropriately, and you don't bother people, and you don't talk on your phone, and various other things, the probability that you're going to be confronted by an angry primate or some other predator is very, very low. And so you'd say, well, you're normal. You feel like you do normally here. But I would say the only reason you feel that way normally to begin with is because you don't go places where you feel not normal. You stay away from them. And everyone knows what those places are like. The world is divided, just like the Taoists say, into the orderly domain and the chaotic domain. And you need to know how to operate in both, and you need to balance them. And you need to transform one into the other. And that's basically what you're doing when you're interacting with reality. And, you know, one of the things that I will claim, and this will become more important as the course progresses, is that when you're doing something meaningful, you're doing that properly. And the sense of meaning that you have is actually an indication that your psychophysiology is manifesting that you're in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And it's real. It's not only real, it's like it's the most real thing. It's where potential is transformed into reality. And it's hard to get any more real than that. So that's partly why I'm telling you that these things aren't exactly metaphors. You know, they have to be represented by metaphor in some sense, but the reality that's underlying them isn't, it's not just a story, even though it is a story. It's not just a story. It's a real representation of reality. So, you know, the other thing I kind of outlined here is that when you hit an anomaly, it's sort of the anomaly is the thing from which everything shines forth. You know, when it's still really anomalous, what happens is it manifests itself to you in sort of like a burst of contradictory meanings. And that can be paralyzing. You know, you could be really, really, really excited and really, really, really nervous, which might happen, for example, if you were going to a job interview and you actually wanted the job. It would be even worse if you went to a job interview and like 30% of you wanted the job because, you know, that's the 30% that wants to develop, and another 30% would just as soon fail so that you crawl under your bed at home and stay there with the dust bunnies till you're 40. And another 25% of you is resentful about the fact that you have to go get a stupid job at all. And so then you go in there and it's really, really complicated, because not only is that all that potential there, but you're fractured, and those fractures make the whole situation way more complicated and unstable than it would otherwise have to be. So, and that happens to people all the time. People hedge their bets in job interviews all the time because they think, I don't really care. It's like, no, you care. You just want to have a story to tell yourself if you fail. Well, and then if you have that story, well, then probably you're going to fail, because you don't get to do that. You can't go in there at 60% and hope to win. You have to go in there at 100%. Now, that's cool too, because what it implies is just what the clinical psychologists have been telling people for 60 years or 70 years, right? You have to voluntarily face the things that you're afraid of. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, because otherwise you could just go play in traffic. So it's not a call to stupid adventure. What it does is assume that you've got a direction, and that the direction is a valid direction. And then that what happens is, as you pursue that, obstacles emerge, anomalous, threatening obstacles, and then you either confront them or you abandon the whole project. Well, generally speaking, if you chop them into little pieces, then you can confront them and digest them, and then you get stronger because you're doing all this digesting. It's like you're eating the monster of chaos, and that's a classic metaphor for developing wisdom, to ingest. Piaget even uses that, right? Assimilate. It's exactly the same idea as ingesting. Instead of what you're eating is information instead of matter. And so, when the information restructures you, it makes you more informed, and that puts you more in formation. So you encounter the anomaly, and it's a burst of contradictory potential, and so that's exactly how you respond to it. Your body's going everywhere at once, because God only knows what's going to happen, and then as you interact with it, it collapses. You're collapsing it. That's what happens when you take control of the situation, and then you reduce it to a single path where everything's going properly. And you might say, well, you're bending it to your own selfish wills, but that's not right, because if you're let's say you're in an interview and there's 5 or 6 people in there, you can't just bend the damn thing to your will, because you have to interact with those people. And so if you don't do that with, you could be a psychopath and manipulate, but that'll only work for a short period of time. You'll get caught, and then you'll have to move, because that's what psychopaths do. But that's how they keep being psychopaths, they exhaust everyone's trust, and then they have to move. And then they go find some other people who are trustworthy, because they've built up trust capital with other people, and then they, betray them, but they have to keep moving. So it's an unstable solution. So you go in there and you do it properly. Well, what are you doing exactly? I would say that if you're really, really nailing that interview, you're saying, well, here's a future that we could all march together into confidently and happily. That's what you're saying. And I'm the person to do that. Now, you might be saying that on a relatively low scale, like, if I'm your assistant, you're never going to have to worry about me, because I'm always going to be there, And then if maybe you're the CEO, you're going to say, well, this is the way that all of us are going, and here's why, and this is what it's going to look like. And the better you are at that, the more that potential will turn into, it multiplies. That's what happens. If you're good at dealing with it, the potential that's accessible to you multiplies. So, which is really cool, and also how you'd hope it would be, because you'd hope that more potential would manifest itself to people who are more competent. If things worked well, that would be good. Maybe the best way to overcome predators, the spirit of the predator, is to confront it. Well, that's a hell of an idea. Then you might think, well, how deep an idea is that? You confront the predator, you get the gold. Well, this is that you confront infinite possibility and you get the reward. You encounter infinite possibility properly. You derive from it the rewards that it offers. What are the rewards that infinite possibility offers? Who knows? Right? We have no idea. And it's so interesting, because we live at a time in history where that's literally true. Like, I would hesitate to predict anything about 50 years from now. I quit worrying about the future about 20 years ago, because I thought, oh, I get it. No matter what happens, the probability that it's something I predict is 0. So it's like, whatever you're worried about, well, go ahead and worry about it, but something completely different is going to happen, so it's not really all that useful. You should just be ready for whatever comes, because here it comes. You know, like, I think we'll have fully functional autonomous robots within 3 or 4 years. So, and that's a real game changer, you know, and God only knows what's going to happen after that. Transplantable organs, those things are, you can print those on 3D printers already. What else? Well, augmented intelligence. Well, you all have augmented intelligence already. What good are facts? You just look them up, right? Everyone's an infinite supply of facts. Yeah, it's like, if you're forming a relationship with someone, what you do is you basically mutually open up your shells, you know, and, you know, or you kind of go like this. You know, and if it has to close permanently, well, then you go. But, yeah, so that's another thing that's interesting, too, because what it implies is that unless you know, voluntarily expose your vulnerabilities, you'll never find a partner, or they won't be a real partner because they don't know who the hell you are. And then you're weak because there's only one of you, you know, so, yeah.
But the beauty in that is that it's like completely anonymous, too.
Yeah, and so why do you like that?
Because I can share, like, my deepest secrets, but not feel like anyone really knows.
You know, there's some evidence that people like computer-guided psychotherapy.
Yeah.
For exactly that reason. Is like, you can be completely honest with the computer because, like, it doesn't care. Not yet. It will soon, but it probably won't judge you any more harshly than you set it to. It's like, love and affection today. We need a representation for potential. Well, you think, well, why? Well, because it's actually potential that you're interacting with all the time. Now, what seems to me to have happened was that, you know, this is an evolutionary just so story, so I'm not assuming that it actually worked precisely this way, but it doesn't matter, because I'm going to touch on the appropriate, you know, the appropriate features. Well, one of the things we know about social animals, generally speaking, and animals in general, is that they have a territory, right? And so you think, well, what is their territory exactly? And you might say, well, you can mark it out. Here's a, oh, what do we think about? What would have a territory? We might as well make it like a tiger. They're pretty solitary, so it'll be simple. They have a big territory, right? It spans hundreds of square miles. And the reason for that is, well, they're tigers. You can't have like 50 of them because they'll just eat everything that's there. You know, you have to have a big territory to support one apex predator. So then you might say, well, what exactly is the territory of the tiger? And you'd say, well, here's its boundaries. This is where it roams. But that's not the right way of thinking about the territory of the tiger, because the territory of the tiger is actually all the places where, when the tiger does its thing, the things that the tiger wants to or expects happens. That's the tiger's territory. It's the same with you. You know, you're at home wherever you know what to do. And what you're doing when you know what to do is you know how to match this hierarchy, which is partly action-oriented. You know how to match the hierarchy with the situation so that when you put it into practice, the potential that's there transforms itself into what you're aiming at. And that's your territory. And you know, and you need to think about it that way, because your territory can shift very rapidly on you, and if you think about it geographically, it's kind of confusing. So let's say you're on the subway that you always take, and then someone sits down beside you and they're muttering away madly and have a pretty malevolent look on their face, and you get a glimpse inside their coat and it's like there's a knife. It's like you're not in your territory anymore. And the fact that all of the objective entities are still there arrayed around you it's nothing more than a, what would you call it? It's a delusion at that point to think that those things characterize where you are. Okay, so if you're willing to consider territory as that, it's a space-time continuum, okay? And the reason I'm stressing that, I mean, first of all, whatever reality is a space-time continuum, right? It's got 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, and everyone knows that. As we sit here, more or less stable in 3 dimensions. Time flows past us, in some sense, and so the 3-dimensional reality is transforming all by itself, just because of time. Okay, and so when we're mapping out our territories, we map out space-time territories. And so that means that not only do you know where you are, you know when you are. And if you're in your territory, you know how to act for that place and that time so that you transform the potential that's there into whatever it is that you're aiming at.